I had 30 seconds before the dessert course arrived and the lights went out. My hand wasn't shaking. That was the part that scared me. A normal person's hand would be shaking. Mine moved like it belonged to someone else, someone who had already decided, already crossed the line, already couldn't go back. I pressed the receipt against my apron and folded it in quarters. The ink was barely dry. 4 words. I'd used 4 words to potentially end my life. You've been betrayed. Leave. Around me, the Gilded Lotus did what it always did on a Friday night. It performed wealth. Crystal against crystal. The low, self-satisfied murmur of people who had never once worried about a hospital bill. Somewhere near the bar, a woman laughed too loudly at something that wasn't funny, and the sound dissolved into the warmth like smoke. Outside, Chicago was frozen solid. In here, the air was thick, almost perfumed, candlelight and expensive cologne and something underneath it all that smelled, just faintly, like danger. I walked toward table 2 the way you walk toward something you cannot survive. Gary Carey, Canary, sat with his back to the wall. Always the wall. I'd noticed that the moment he arrived. He occupied the corner booth the way kings occupy thrones, not by taking up space, but by making all the other space irrelevant. Dark suit. No tie. A jaw like it had been cut with a straight edge. His eyes moved across the room in slow, methodical sweeps, not paranoid. Predatory. The kind of eyes that had already counted the exits, already clocked every face, already decided who in this room was a threat and who was furniture. He had filed me under furniture. That was about to change. Beside him, Diana Lenz wasn't looking at him at all. She was looking at her phone. One manicured thumb scrolling. A small, private smile on her lips, the kind women wear when they're thinking about someone who isn't in the room. She was stunning in the specific way that money perfects, the black blazer tailored to the millimeter, the diamond at her ear catching candlelight and throwing it back like a dare. Her perfume had reached me 2 tables away. White florals. Clean. Almost bridal. She looked like a woman completely, helplessly in love. She wasn't. 20 minutes ago, I had heard her order his death. The wine cellar at the Gilded Lotus wasn't a cellar. It was a vault, temperature controlled, softly lit, the bottles glowing amber and green behind glass like something sacred. I'd been sent down for a Chateau Margaux. Table 9. Birthday dinner, very important. Please don't grab the wrong vintage, Susan. I was threading between the Burgundy and the Bordeaux when I heard her voice. I stopped. It wasn't the words that froze me first. It was the tone. Diana Lenz's voice, when she was performing for her fiancé's table, was warm silk. This was something else entirely. This was the blade underneath the silk. She was speaking low, clipped, certain, the voice of someone issuing an invoice, not making a request. I pressed myself between 2 racks and didn't breathe. I caught fragments. Corner booth. Glass wall. Thomas will kill the lights. And 1 word. Twice, a name she said like it was a password, like it unlocked something. Black. I didn't know what it meant yet. Her heels clicked up the stairs. Her perfume, white florals, funeral suite, trailed behind her like a warning. I stood in the dark between $5,000 worth of wine and understood, with the particular clarity of someone whose body has decided to survive before their brain has caught up, that I had just heard something I was never supposed to hear. Upstairs, I could hear the dining room humming. The crystal. The laughter. The soft, civilized sounds of a world that had no idea what was already in position inside it. I looked at the receipt in my hand. I thought about my father. The machines. The steady, merciless beeping of borrowed time. Then I thought about the man upstairs with the predator's eyes who was going to die in approximately 23 minutes, and the woman beside him, scrolling her phone, smiling at the man she was killing him for. 4 words. I wrote 4 words. And I walked back upstairs to deliver them. The note was already folded by the time I reached the table. Diana still hadn't looked up from her phone. That was the only reason I was still alive. The Margaux for table 9 was a 2018, 3rd shelf from the bottom, left side of the burgundy wall. I knew this cellar the way I knew my own apartment, by feel, by habit, by the particular silence it held when the kitchen noise above went distant and soft. I was reaching for the bottle when I heard her, not words at first. Just tone. A woman's voice, low, deliberate, stripped of every warmth that a woman's voice is supposed to carry. It moved through the cellar like a blade looking for a gap. I went still without deciding to, my fingers frozen around the Margot's neck, my body making a calculation my brain hadn't caught up with yet. She was speaking Italian. Fast, clipped. The kind spoken by someone who learned it not in a classroom but in rooms where the wrong word got you killed. Tavolo du. Angolo. Visual labura, table 2. Corner. Clean sight line. I pressed myself into the narrow gap between the burgundy rack and the stone wall. The cold hit me immediately, 55 degrees of climate-controlled air that suddenly felt arctic. Thomas Spegni La Lucy. Thomas cuts the lights, then a name. Dropped into the sentence like a stone into still water, black, just that. A pause. An acknowledgement. Then she moved on. I didn't know what it meant. I filed it somewhere behind my ribs anyway, next to the cold, next to the sound of my own heartbeat. Which had gotten very loud and very stupid. Sono già in posizione. They're already in position. Her heels clicked against the stone. Once. Twice. Climbing. I pressed harder into the rack, a bottle edge biting into my spine, and didn't move. Didn't breathe. Her perfume came last. White florals, the kind you spray on before a funeral when you're the one who called it. Then it dissolved into the dark, and I was alone with what I'd heard. The dining room looked exactly the same as when I'd left it. That was the problem. Everything hummed with its usual elegant indifference. Crystal catching candlelight, silverware arranged with geometric precision, the low jazz quartet threading something melancholy through the warm air. Tables full of people who believed they were the most dangerous thing in the room tonight. I stood at the service entrance and looked at all of it differently. The man at the bar had been there when I started my shift. Bourbon, neat, no ice. I'd served him myself, 2 hours ago. The glass hadn't moved. Not lowered, not raised, not touched. He was watching the room the way you only watch a room when you're waiting for something specific to happen inside it. His eyes moved in a pattern. Door, table 2, service corridor. Door, table 2, service corridor. I made myself look away before he could feel me looking. Near the corridor that led to the kitchen, 2 men sat at a foretop they hadn't been seated at when I left. No menus. Backs pressed to the wall, both of them, which is not how people sit when they're waiting for food. That's how people sit when they want to see everything coming and have something solid behind them. One of them had his right hand resting inside his jacket. He wasn't cold, and then there was Thomas, who'd worked here longer than me. Thomas, who knew where the breaker panel was because he'd helped the electrician replace a fuse 6 months ago and never forgot anything useful. Thomas, who was standing 12 feet from the light switch with the particular stillness of a man who was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he'd been told, his hand rested against the wall. Casual. Patient. I thought about walking out. I ran the calculation the way you do when you're standing at the edge of something with no bottom, fast, desperate, honest. Clock out early. Tell the manager I'm sick. Walk through the February air to the parking garage, drive to the south side, sit beside my father's hospital bed and listen to his machines count his heartbeats while the world above me did whatever it was going to do. Let it happen. Let him die. He was a mafia boss. He had earned his enemies. This was not my world and it was not my war and I owed Gary Carey exactly nothing. My father's monitor beeped in my memory. Steady. Patient. Expensive. I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out a receipt from table 6, salmon. Sparkling water, creme brulee, $180 before gratuity. I turned it over. Pressed it against my palm. Uncapped my pen with my teeth because my other hand was shaking too badly to manage it. 4 words. That was all the margin there was. You've been betrayed. Leave. I folded it twice, creased each fold hard, and walked toward table 2. Table 2 was 10 steps from the service entrance. I counted them. Not because I needed to, I'd walked this floor 8 months without counting, but because my brain needed something to do that wasn't screaming. 10 steps. The note was folded in my left palm, pressed flat against my lifeline. Diana didn't look up when I arrived. She was typing something, her thumb moving fast, a private smile at the corner of her mouth, the kind you wear when you're saying something to someone you shouldn't be saying it to. Her champagne sat half-finished. Her fiancé sat 2 feet away, and she was more present in whoever's phone she was staring at than in this restaurant, this table, this life she was about to detonate. I set the water glass down on Gary Carey's side of the table. Standard. Practiced. The move I'd made 1,000 times on 100 tables, and in the half-second that Diana's eyes stayed down, I pressed the folded receipt against the back of his hand, his fingers closed around it before I'd fully let go. Not fast, there was nothing urgent in the movement, nothing that would read as anything other than a man receiving his water. Just fingers closing. Patient. Absolute. Like he'd been waiting for something to be handed to him all evening and had simply been unsure what shape it would take. I straightened. Repositioned the tray against my hip. Became furniture again. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at the note. He lifted his water glass with his right hand, drank, set it down, and beneath the table, completely invisible beneath the white fall of the tablecloth, unfolded the receipt with one hand in a movement so controlled it made my chest hurt. I watched his face the way you watch a frozen lake, looking for the crack, there. The jaw. A tightening so small that if I hadn't been looking for it, if I hadn't been cataloging his every micro-expression like my life depended on it, because it did, I would have missed it entirely, for words. And he knew. He set his glass down and turned to Diana with an expression I can only describe as surgical warmth. Let's switch, darling. His voice was smooth, unhurried, the kind of calm that doesn't come naturally, the kind that gets built over years of needing it. I want to drink from your glass. Diana looked up from her phone for the first time since I'd arrived. Something crossed her face, a ripple beneath the composure, gone almost instantly. That's strange, even for you. Humor me. He slid his glass toward her. Unless there's a reason you'd rather not. The silence lasted exactly 1 beat too long. Then Diana reached for his glass with a hand that wasn't quite steady, and Gary Carey smiled at her across the white tablecloth. It didn't reach his eyes. Nothing that dangerous ever does. The lights didn't flicker. They didn't fade. They just stopped, absolute and instant, like the building had exhaled its last breath, and the gilded lotus came apart at the seams, crystal hit marble. A woman screamed somewhere near the back. The jazz quartet died mid-note, leaving a silence that lasted exactly half a second before the chaos filled it completely. In that half second, Gary Carey's hand closed around my arm like a vice. He was already moving, already constructing the scene, his voice rising just enough to carry to the nearest tables, sharp with manufactured fury. You spilled on a $12,000 suit. His grip hauled me forward, and I stumbled, my hip catching the table edge hard enough to make the gasp completely genuine. Around us, heads turned and just as quickly looked away, because nobody in a restaurant like this wants to witness a man destroying a waitress over a dry cleaning bill. The embarrassment was a curtain. He pulled me behind it, the kitchen doors swung open and swallowed us whole. What was on the other side was not a kitchen anymore. 3 men in chef's whites moving with a purpose that had nothing to do with cooking. One of them came at Canary with something that caught the emergency lighting, long, flat, wrong for any legitimate kitchen task. Canary caught his wrist mid-swing, turned it past the point it was designed to go, and the man's sound was short and terrible. He was already moving to the second before the first hit the floor. I stopped watching and started surviving. The pan was on the range, a wide sauté, oil shimmering at the edge of smoke. I didn't think. I grabbed the handle, pivoted, and threw it at the man who'd just spotted me across the prep station. The sound he made I will carry for a long time. Storage room. Now, Canary's hand found the small of my back and I ran. The dry storage was narrow and dark and smelled like flour and fear. He pulled me into the gap between 2 floor-to-ceiling shelving units and we pressed flat against the concrete, my face against his chest, his arm locked around my waist, both of us reduced to the simplest possible instructions. Still, silent, invisible, his heartbeat was fast beneath my forehead. But steady. Methodical. The heartbeat of a man who had hidden in dark rooms before and knew how to wait. Outside, footsteps moved through the dark, slow and deliberate. I stopped breathing and let his stillness teach me how. The SUV smelled like leather and gun oil and the particular cold that clings to men who've just come in from violence. Chicago blurred past the windows, streetlights smearing against the glass, the lake invisible somewhere to the east, the city indifferent as it always was to whatever was happening inside any given moving vehicle on any given night. I was still picking flour out of my hair when he started talking, no preamble. No "are you alright" or "that was close." Just facts, delivered in the same register someone might use to read a balance sheet. Gary Carey looked out the window and dismantled everything in the cleanest, most bloodless way possible. Robert Beck, he said. Known as Black. His half-brother. Same father, different mothers. The first wife had died young, the second had raised Robert like her own until the elder Carey had grown tired of the arrangement and made a decision that exiled Robert from the family, from the empire, from everything that should have been half his by blood. That was 12 years ago. 7 years ago, Robert Beck had apparently died in a warehouse fire in Seoul that Gary himself had arranged. He said this without looking at me. Without inflection. The way you state a fact you've long since made peace with, except he hadn't made peace with it, because Robert Beck was not dead. Diana had been his from the beginning. Not a romance that soured. Not a woman who changed her mind. She had been placed. Positioned like a piece on a board that Gary hadn't known he was playing on. The engagement was 18 months of architecture, of a life constructed around proximity and access and the particular vulnerability of a man who had let himself, just once, believe that someone loved him without an agenda. She was 4 months pregnant, Canary said. The child was Robert's. I looked down at my hands. There was a burn across 2 fingers from the pan, shallow, already blistering. The kind of pain that would have been the most significant thing that happened to me today, under any other circumstances. She was never yours, I said, because I needed to say something and that was the truest thing I had. No. A beat. She was always his. I was just the obstacle he needed removed to claim what he wanted. I thought about the wine cellar. About the specific cold of that room, the way Diana's voice had moved through it like something engineered rather than spoken. I thought about Thomas at the breaker panel, patient as a man who'd been rehearsing. I thought about the way she'd smiled at her phone at that table, the ease of it. The complete absence of performance. She hadn't been pretending badly. She'd been pretending perfectly, for 18 months, because Robert Beck had chosen her well. I hadn't stumbled into an assassination attempt. I had stumbled into a dynasty civil war, the kind that gets written in blood and settled in bodies, and I had put my name on it with 4 words and a borrowed pen. The building didn't look like a home. It wasn't trying to. It rose above the lakefront like a declaration, all raw concrete and dark glass, brutal angles against a sky the color of old iron. No softness anywhere in the architecture. No concession to warmth or welcome. Just mass and height and the quiet message that whatever lived inside this building had stopped needing to justify itself to the world outside. 2 security checkpoints between the street and the underground garage. Retinal scans both times. The kind of infrastructure you build when you've accurately assessed how many people want you dead. I followed Gary Carey into an elevator that required a keycard and a fingerprint and rose without a sound. The LED panel counted floors in silence. He stood beside me with the stillness he seemed to carry everywhere, not relaxed, never relaxed, but contained. A man whose default state was readiness dressed as calm. The penthouse opened directly from the elevator. Floor-to-ceiling windows, the frozen lake spread black and vast beyond the glass, furniture arranged with the precision of a space that had never been lived in carelessly. Everything gray. Concrete floors, steel fixtures, slate-colored everything. Beautiful the way a held breath is beautiful, tense, suspended, waiting. A man in tactical black met us at the door and held out his hand to me without speaking. I didn't understand until Canary said. Quietly, "Your phone." I looked at him. "I need to call my father. Your father is asleep. I had someone check an hour ago." No hesitation, no apology. "The Lenz family has your face now. Every number you call becomes a location. Every location becomes a liability, so I'm a prisoner." He looked at me steadily. "You're a problem I've chosen to keep alive. There's a difference." A pause. "You can be angry about it. That's fine. But you cannot leave, and you cannot call anyone. until I understand the full shape of what we're walking into. I put my phone in the man's hand. The guest suite was at the end of a hallway that swallowed sound. The room was bigger than my apartment, king bed, sitting area, windows facing the water. Someone had left clothes folded on the chair, sweatpants, a thermal shirt, thick socks. Practical. My size, approximately. The consideration of it made something in my chest clench in a way I didn't have the energy to examine. The shower ran hot immediately. No waiting. Of course not. I stood under the water and gave myself 2 minutes. I counted them. I let everything that had no business surviving pass tonight, the fear, the flower in my hair, the sound the man made when the oil hit him. The way my father's monitor beeped in a frequency I'd memorized without meaning to. I let all of it come up and out and wash down the drain, then I turned the water to cold. 30 seconds, then I turned it off. The girl who apologized for taking up space had just survived a war zone in a polyester uniform. She'd thrown scalding oil at a man without flinching. She'd pressed a note into the hand of the most dangerous person in Chicago and held his gaze while his fiancé sat 3 feet away. That girl was not going back to table 9. I dried off and looked at my reflection until I recognized the person looking back, someone else entirely. Good. She was going to need to be. She heard the voice through the door, low, unhurried, laced with the specific pleasure of a man who had been waiting a long time to make this particular phone call. It moved through the concrete walls of the penthouse like smoke finding gaps, and even without the words she knew the tone, the warm, almost affectionate cruelty of someone who believes they've already won. She didn't decide to walk out. She just stopped being able to stay still. Canary stood at the windows with his back to the room, phone on the glass table beside him, the speakerphone filling the space between him and the black water outside. When he heard her footsteps, he ended the call without a word. The silence that replaced it was heavier than the voice had been. That was him, she said. Yes, he knows we're alive. He always knew. He turned. In the low light his face was all shadow and structure, unreadable as architecture. He wanted me to know that he knew. That's all that call was. Something cracked open in her chest. Not fear, she was past fear, but fury, clean and clarifying. Then what am I doing here? You're telling me I can't leave, can't call anyone, can't choose anything, and the man who wants us both dead is just calling to gloat. I'm telling you that you're still alive. In my world, that's the same as choosing. That's not a choice. That's just survival with better furniture. He looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, not softening exactly, but opening. A door she hadn't known was there. You're right, he said. Quietly. Like the words cost him something. I don't know how to give people choices. I know how to give them outcomes. A pause. You're the first person in 20 years who looked at me and chose to stay. Not because I paid them. Not because they were afraid. You chose it. The room was very still. She crossed it. She kissed him first, not desperately, not as a collision, but as a decision. Deliberate. Eyes open. She knew exactly what she was walking into: the empire, the war at sunrise, the man who spoke violence like a first language and carried the weight of it in every line of his body. She chose it anyway, every last burning inch of it. The Lens estate looked exactly like what it was, a dynasty performing itself for an audience. White roses banked against marble columns, hundreds of gilded chairs arranged in perfect rows, chandeliers throwing light so warm it felt like a lie. Guests in their finest, speaking in the low, satisfied register of people who believed they were safe because they were powerful. Susan walked through it in midnight blue silk and borrowed diamonds, and nobody looked twice. The ballistic weave sewn into the bodice added weight she could feel with every breath, a constant, grounding pressure against her ribs. Canary moved beside her in charcoal gray, hazel contacts turning his eyes into something almost ordinary. A faint scar along his jaw that hadn't been there yesterday. 6 rows back. Close enough to see everything. Far enough that Diana Lens, radiant and glacial at the front of the ballroom, let her gaze pass over Susan without a flicker of recognition. The ceremony began. The music swelled. Diana walked toward a man who didn't know she'd already buried him in her mind, and Robert Beck waited at the altar wearing the expression of someone claiming an inheritance. Canary's phone was in his hand beneath the seat. She watched him type without looking down. One text. Send. The screens positioned around the ballroom, meant to display the happy couple in close, golden detail, flickered once. Went black. Then filled with something else entirely, Diana's voice. Cold, specific, and wrong. The wine cellar recording, every word of it, time-stamped and irrefutable, pouring out of the speakers and into the carefully constructed silence of the room. The ballroom came apart, guests surged to their feet. Voices collided in 4 languages. The Costa family elders turned toward Diana with the particular fury of people for whom betrayal is not personal, it's structural. Black's face at the altar went white, then red, then something beyond both. Canary stood. Removed the contacts in one smooth motion. Hello, Robert, he said, into the chaos, as if they were the only 2 people in the room. Did you miss me? Black didn't reach for Canary, he reached for Susan. She was already moving. The gun from the hidden seam of her dress was in her hand before his finger found his trigger. The motion Canary had drilled into her until it lived in muscle memory rather than thought. The shot caught Black in the shoulder and spun him hard. He went down with a sound that wasn't quite human. Diana materialized from the left, wedding dress already torn, a knife from the bouquet catching the chandelier light. Her face was stripped of every performance. Just fury. Just the woman underneath. You were supposed to be nothing, she said. You were just a waitress. Susan didn't wait. Didn't hesitate. Didn't look for someone to save her. She moved inside Diana's guard and she survived. The only way that had ever mattered. Diana fell slowly, the white silk spreading beneath her like something blooming. Susan stood over her and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. Clean and permanent. I was, she said. Now I'm something else. Her father's first word was her name, not a question. Not confusion. Just Susan, spoken in the particular way he'd said it her whole life, like it meant something beyond identification, like it was its own complete sentence. She was holding his hand when his eyes opened, the same way she'd held it through 41 days of machines and silence and the specific, exhausting faith of waiting for someone to come back. The doctors called it a miracle. They said this with the careful wonder of people trained not to believe in miracles, and she let them have it. Canary, when she told him, said only, the new equipment helped. And the specialist I brought in from Seoul. Practical. Unadorned. The way he always deflected from anything that might look like tenderness if examined directly, she called it grace. The thing that had started all of it, not the wine cellar, not the note, but the part of her that had been incapable of walking away from a stranger's death. That impulse, that inconvenient, dangerous, life-altering impulse, it had given her father back to her. It seemed worth naming correctly. The fortress above Lake Michigan was not the same building it had been in February. The concrete walls were still gray. The windows still faced the lake with an uncompromising blankness. None of that had changed. But there were plants now along the south-facing ledge, her doing. Stubbornly alive despite the altitude and the drafts. There were books stacked on the steel coffee table and on the floor beside the bed and in the kitchen where books had no business being. There was a chess game on the low table near the window, always mid-play, perpetually unfinished, because her father and Gary Carey could not agree on anything except that neither of them was willing to concede. Her father lived in the East Wing. He was walking again, slowly, complaining about the physical therapist with the cheerful persistence of a man rediscovering how much he enjoyed complaining. Canary visited him on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. She had watched them together enough times now to stop being surprised by it, the way Gary sat across from her father with his hands around a coffee cup and listened, actually listened, in the way he gave almost no one else. Something strange and real had grown in the space between them. She didn't have a name for it that wasn't too large or too small. She let it be what it was. On a December night, exactly 1 year after the wedding that became a massacre, she stood at the window and watched snow fall over the frozen lake. Chicago spread behind it, all cold light and indifferent distance. The city that had swallowed her whole and given her back as someone unrecognizable. His arms came around her from behind. Unhurried. Certain. Do you regret it? She didn't have to think. Never. Not even a little. He turned her gently, and she looked up into eyes that had been obsidian the first night she met them, calculating, depthless, the eyes of a man who measured everything including mercy. They were warm now. Not soft. Gary Carey would never be soft. But warm, in the particular way of a fire built inside concrete walls, contained, deliberate, and real. She pressed her hand flat against his chest and felt his heartbeat beneath her palm. Steady. The same heartbeat she'd pressed her face against in a dark storage room while footsteps moved past them in the red-tinged dark. "I chose you," she said. Monster and all, something moved across his face that she had learned, over 12 months of watching him closely, to recognize as the closest he came to undone. He pulled her in and held her the way a man holds something he came terrifyingly close to never having. Outside, snow kept falling. Chicago kept sleeping. Inside, they ruled.